The first raindrop struck the rusted tin roof of a small fishing shack in Port-au-Prince just after midnight. It was so soft, so ordinary, that no one gave it a second thought. After all, this was the Caribbean in July. Rain was as common as the salty breeze rolling in from the sea. But by dawn, those harmless drops had become sheets of water so heavy that cars floated like paper boats and entire neighborhoods began to vanish beneath rising, angry waves. They called it Tropical Storm Chantal when it first appeared on satellite images, nothing more than a swirling patch of clouds off the Lesser Antilles. Meteorologists debated if it would even hold together for more than a day. But as Chantal crept westward, its path seemed almost alive, threading between islands as if it had chosen them with purpose. By the time it neared Hispaniola, the wind carried a low-pitched howl, like a warning whispered through the air, that locals swore they could feel in their bones. The morning Chantal made landfall, cell towers failed one by one, power grids fizzled out, and the internet blinked into silence. Radios crackled with fragments of desperate voices, reporters trying to describe scenes they could barely comprehend. Roads transformed into rivers, bridges snapped like twigs, and entire villages were erased in hours. A mother clutched her 3 children to her chest as she climbed to the roof of her 2-story home, now an island surrounded by brown, swirling water. In Florida, where residents were told Chantal would simply skim the coastline, video from a drone showed yachts in Fort Lauderdale slammed into highways like toys hurled by a furious hand. Insurance companies, already stretched thin by previous disasters, quietly muttered words like catastrophic, unprecedented, and uninsurable. But the most chilling part? Chantal wasn't even a hurricane, at least, not officially. It never achieved the sustained wind speeds to earn the name. And yet, it became the costliest storm of the year, doing what no hurricane in history had managed. Causing trillions in damage across 5 countries without ever earning the dreaded category label. What happened next stunned scientists and survivors alike. In the days that followed, aerial footage painted a portrait of devastation so complete it seemed unreal. Entire blocks of Miami were submerged beneath a glassy brown lake, skyscrapers rising from it like lonely monoliths. Cars floated like driftwood, tangled with palm trees ripped out by their roots. From above, it looked beautiful in a twisted, terrifying way, a city reduced to a watercolor of earth tones and silence. But for those trapped inside, there was no beauty. Rescue teams reported rooftops where people had scrawled words in spray paint: help, water, children. Some used bedsheets, some their own blood, desperate to be seen by the helicopters circling overhead. In Haiti, hundreds crowded onto one remaining patch of dry land near Cap Haitian, clutching bundles of clothes, pets, and photographs of loved ones already swept away. What baffled forecasters was how Chantal refused to die. It lingered, feeding off warm currents, zigzagging unpredictably like it was taunting those trying to model its path. One night, it drifted south, surprising Jamaica. The next, it swerved north, pelting the Bahamas with rain so relentless the airports turned into shimmering lagoons. Even the U.S. Navy admitted privately that they'd never seen a storm act like this, like it was thinking. By the time Chantal finally broke apart somewhere in the Gulf, it had left behind a disaster that stretched from tiny fishing villages to billion-dollar coastal developments. Economists estimated the damage at $412 billion, though no one truly knew how to measure what was lost. The homes, the schools, the memories drowned in mud and saltwater. And then came the strange stories. Fishermen in Puerto Rico claimed to have seen lights beneath the water as the storm raged above, glowing orbs that pulsed and moved like they were alive. In Louisiana, divers searching flooded parishes discovered hundreds of cars stacked perfectly on top of each other, as if arranged by some unseen hand. And in Miami's financial district, surveillance cameras captured an eerie moment. At 2:37 a.m., during the height of flooding, a massive freighter drifted down a flooded street with its horn blaring, though every log showed it had no crew aboard. The footage went viral, but was swiftly removed by authorities citing public panic concerns. Even more unsettling was how quickly the official narrative shifted. Government agencies began insisting Chantal was just an unfortunate tropical anomaly. Insurance companies lobbied to reclassify the storm as an act of God to avoid paying billions in claims. And yet, behind closed doors, leaked documents showed climate scientists arguing over data that didn't make sense, like sudden spikes in ocean temperature that appeared only under Chantal's exact track, vanishing as soon as it moved on. As survivors tried to rebuild, whispers began to spread. Was Chantal just another storm? Or was something else at work, something far beyond meteorology. The official investigations were swift, public, and suspiciously neat. Press conferences were held daily, with polished spokespeople standing in front of colorful storm charts, confidently explaining how rare weather patterns had simply lined up in the worst possible way. They blamed sea surface temperatures, erratic wind shear, even El Niño, piecing together a narrative so textbook it felt rehearsed. But on the ground, the people who had lived through Chantal weren't buying it. In Miami's Little Havana, neighbors met nightly in a half-flooded community center, trading stories by lantern light. A mechanic named Jorge swore he'd seen waves rising in unnatural pulses, surging in straight lines like synchronized walls of water rather than random storm surges. A nurse named Danielle described patients arriving at the hospital with strange burns, not chemical, not thermal, but something that looked like lightning had crawled under their skin. Meanwhile, in Haiti, satellite phones captured audio of scientists from the Caribbean Disaster Agency arguing over readings they refused to share publicly. One voice could be heard saying, "No storm moves like that. No storm decides." Even stranger were the accounts from the offshore oil platforms near the Florida Keys. Crews stationed there described tremors deep beneath the sea floor hours before Chantal intensified. Shudders so strong coffee mugs danced across tables and wrenches rattled in their racks. Yet seismic monitors showed nothing. No earthquakes. No tectonic activity. Just silence. By the third week after the floodwaters receded, a leaked NOAA email hit social media, igniting a firestorm of conspiracy theories. The email, dated just 2 days before Chantal made landfall, referenced Project Nemesis, an experimental weather modeling system being tested in the region. It hinted at unexpected resonance patterns and recommended immediate shutdown. Within hours, the post was deleted, accounts suspended, and journalists warned not to spread false information. But it was too late. The story caught fire. Podcasts, news channels, and even late-night comedians began speculating. Was Chantal a natural storm at all? Or had human interference, intentional or accidental, triggered a disaster of unimaginable scale? While the arguments raged online, in the soaked remains of neighborhoods stretching from Port-au-Prince to Pensacola, people were still digging through rubble. Still searching for bodies. Still waiting for insurance checks that never came. And amid the chaos, a single video surfaced from a GoPro strapped to a drone. It was shaky, wind-battered, clearly recorded at the peak of Chantal's fury. But what it showed was chilling, a perfect eye wall forming, not once but twice, within minutes, spinning inside itself like gears locking into place. When scientists tried to explain it, one of them slipped on live television and said, "It looked designed." The backlash spread faster than any official agency could contain. Videos of the double eye wall replayed across every platform, dissected by storm chasers, amateur meteorologists, and armchair conspiracy theorists alike. Hashtags like #Chantal was no accident and #Nemesis storm trended for weeks. In Washington, a closed-door congressional hearing was convened within 48 hours. Senators, their suits damp from the rain-soaked Capitol steps, demanded explanations from NOAA officials, military liaisons, and contractors tied to weather research programs. Every response was careful, measured, and rehearsed. But the documents leaked to certain journalists told another story. One file, marked "Confidential, Eyes Only," outlined a prototype atmospheric manipulation test slated for late June. Chantal had formed in early July. The timeline was uncomfortably close. Meanwhile, cleanup crews in Miami made a startling discovery. In the basement of a high-rise downtown, submerged under 14 feet of brackish water, they found a thick steel door warped outward from internal pressure. Behind it lay what appeared to be a small data center, rows of servers drowned but still blinking faint red lights, powered by an independent backup system. The servers belonged to a private contractor with links to the Department of Defense. When questioned, the company's spokesperson insisted they had nothing to do with weather modification. But within days, every device was confiscated by men in unmarked vans, and workers who'd been part of the recovery operation signed non-disclosure agreements. On the streets, survivors were still trying to live. Shops sold canned food for 5 times the normal price. Hospitals overflowed with waterborne illnesses. Entire neighborhoods sat in darkness because electrical substations remained submerged. And then there were the sightings. In Key West, fishermen claimed to have seen a swirling blue light deep in the water at night, like bioluminescent plankton, but brighter, sharper, moving in deliberate patterns. In Port St. Lucie, a retired Coast Guard officer swore that while piloting a rescue boat, he watched the storm's waves curve unnaturally, as if obeying invisible boundaries. Satellite imagery released by an independent research group in Germany seemed to back him up. One frame showed a massive, faint grid in the water surrounding Chantal's core, a geometric pattern too precise to be natural. When asked about it, the U.S. State Department called the images digitally altered disinformation. But by now, the world was paying attention. European leaders demanded an inquiry at the UN. Caribbean nations threatened to sue the United States if proof of interference emerged. And in Beijing, state-run news outlets began running segments titled, "Who Controls the Weather Controls the World," suggesting Chantal wasn't a tragedy, but a test. All the while, families in Miami and Port-au-Prince were still sleeping in shelters, their homes reduced to mold-ridden husks. Aid trickled in too slowly. Billions in promised funds disappeared into bureaucratic labyrinths. And then, one night, a hacker group calling themselves Deluge broke into NOAA's servers. What they released would ignite the biggest scandal of the decade. The hackers didn't release the files all at once. Instead, they trickled them out in bursts, forcing the world to pay attention with each new revelation. The first drop contained memos between NOAA and a private defense contractor, Halcyon Dynamics, discussing ionospheric excitation parameters and storm energy amplification thresholds. Most of the public didn't understand the jargon, but scientists and military analysts did, and their alarmed commentary lit up social media. The second leak hit even harder. It was a recorded conference call dated June 28, less than 2 weeks before Chantal's formation. A man identified only as Project Lead stated clearly, "If we can hold the test zone steady long enough, the storm will sustain itself without classification escalation. Optics remain manageable." Another voice replied, "Understood. We'll monitor blowback after the event." Blowback. That word became the spark for outrage. Global protests erupted almost overnight. Crowds filled streets in Kingston, Miami, and San Juan, holding signs that read, "We are not your test subjects." Activists chained themselves to the gates of Halcyon Dynamics headquarters in Houston, while Caribbean leaders demanded the UN impose sanctions until answers were given. The third data drop was the one that couldn't be denied. It contained raw satellite images overlaid with strange, lattice-like grids stretching across the Atlantic where Chantal's path began. Alongside them were internal emails where engineers discussed how the network array could influence weather formations when aligned with natural conditions. Suddenly, the earlier denials unraveled. Reporters grilled government officials, demanding to know why a military contractor had any role in atmospheric modeling. Press conferences grew hostile, with questions shouted over shaky voices and visible sweat on the foreheads of those supposed to be in control. While the world argued, a woman named Marisol Rivera was still living in the wreckage of her apartment in Little Haiti. She had lost her husband and her 2 brothers when the storm surge swallowed their street in less than an hour. For weeks she searched, finding only pieces of furniture, scattered photographs, and mud-stained clothes clinging to palm trees like ghosts. One morning, while combing through debris near what used to be a small electronics shop, Marisol found something unusual: a sealed waterproof case wedged under a collapsed awning. Inside were hard drives, each labeled with a Halcyon Dynamics logo and a barcode. She didn't know what they were, but instinct told her they mattered. She brought them to a local journalist known for exposing corruption in Miami's city government. Within hours, the journalist's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except the hard drives. Marisol's story began to spread, but she refused to stop speaking. "They killed my family," she told reporters. "If this was an experiment, they drowned my city to play with their machines." And then came the final hacker release, the one Deluge had been holding back, waiting for the world to be watching. It was a video. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped July 2nd. It showed a massive floating platform in the middle of the Atlantic, surrounded by pylons extending into the clouds. Bolts of energy arced upward like silent lightning as a storm system spun overhead. A voice off camera said, "Stabilization achieved. Initiating full sequence." Seconds later, the video cut to static. The video went viral in under an hour, reaching every corner of the globe before authorities could even attempt takedowns. News anchors called it the smoking gun, while governments scrambled to respond. White House press briefings turned chaotic, with journalists shouting over each other. Was Chantal man-made? Who authorized the test? How many more projects like this exist? Halcyon Dynamics released a statement denying any wrongdoing, claiming the video was heavily edited. But forensic analysts confirmed the footage was authentic. Satellite records matched the platform's coordinates, and even ocean freight logs showed supply ships headed to the same location weeks before Chantal appeared. In the UN General Assembly, Caribbean nations demanded immediate sanctions and reparations. The Haitian ambassador's words drew a standing ovation. "You drowned our land, our homes, and our children, not with the wrath of nature, but with the arrogance of man." Public outrage turned violent in some places. Protests in Miami led to clashes with riot police, while in Port-au-Prince, survivors marched carrying coffins through flooded streets still reeking of mildew and decay. Marisol Rivera, still grieving but unafraid, found herself at the center of this storm of anger. She never intended to be an activist. She was just a woman who wanted answers. But when she spoke, people listened. Her interviews weren't scripted speeches. They were raw and unflinching. She talked about clinging to her roof as her husband's fingers slipped away into the black water, about watching her neighbors' homes crumble like paper. Her story struck a nerve, and soon she was invited to speak at rallies, press conferences, and eventually, in front of the UN itself. Footage of her trembling but defiant voice went viral. If you can control a storm, then you are responsible for every life it takes. This isn't science. This is murder. Behind the scenes, more leaks continued to surface. A whistleblower inside Halcyon admitted the platform in the video was part of a program called Project Atlas, designed to test large-scale climate interventions for disaster response. He insisted the storm's devastation was unintentional, but his emails revealed discussions of acceptable collateral regions and target zones with low economic resilience. Low economic resilience, in other words, poor nations. By now, Marisol was under constant surveillance. Unmarked cars parked outside her temporary shelter. Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Friends warned her she might become an accident, but she refused to back down. And then, something unexpected happened. Satellite imagery captured two more floating platforms in different parts of the ocean, one in the Pacific, one in the Indian Ocean, hidden until then. Each was bigger than the one linked to Chantal. Both appeared to be fully operational. When this news broke, panic set in. Stock markets crashed. Airlines reported mass cancellations as travelers feared storms could be triggered. Even governments allied with the U.S. began distancing themselves, publicly condemning weather manipulation programs while privately demanding access to the technology. The world's atmosphere, once seen as untouchable, was now a weapon, and everyone wanted it. Marisol's speech at the United Nations became the moment that shifted history. Standing before delegates from 193 countries, she held up a photograph of her family, the only thing she had left, and said, "You can rebuild a city, but you cannot resurrect the people you drowned." Her words were met with silence so deep it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Within weeks, the leaked documents forced Halcyon Dynamics to shut down. Executives faced criminal charges for reckless endangerment and negligence, though most quietly settled with fines that barely dented their profits. But the real consequence came when international law was rewritten. Any attempt to manipulate weather systems was now classified as a crime against humanity. The platforms in the Pacific and Indian Oceans were dismantled under UN supervision. Their wreckage sunk to the ocean floor. Satellite surveillance was increased tenfold, with countries cooperating to ensure no secret tests could ever be conducted again. For survivors like Marisol, justice was bittersweet. Compensation funds took years to arrive, and no amount of money could replace what was lost. But her fight inspired something far greater, a global reckoning with the dangerous arrogance of believing nature could be controlled without consequence. On the 5th anniversary of Chantal, Marisol visited the memorial wall in Miami, where thousands of names were etched into steel. As the sun rose over the still rebuilding city, she placed her husband's photo at the base of the wall and whispered, "They finally heard us." For the first time since that stormy night, she felt the wind as something natural again.